Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on developments, trends, and insights in the international education sector at the 2022 COBIS Annual Conference. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is MacKenzie Murray, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Systems here at Faria Education Group. Today, I'll be taking you through a presentation on developments, trends, and insights that we have seen here at Faria in our 15 years of working with thousands of international schools around the world. We'll start off the presentation with a short introduction to Faria and an overview of the international schools landscape of the past 20 years to give you some context for the trends that we'll be discussing. Next, we'll move on to the trends themselves and finally wrap up with a discussion on where we see things headed next. Thank you so much for joining the presentation, and I hope you learned something today. As I mentioned, we'll start off with a short introduction to Faria. Many of you might be familiar with our flagship system, ManageBack, which is a learning management system that traditionally serves schools running the IB program, but it's now used by schools delivering a wide variety of international programs and curricula around the world. We also work with international schools in their admissions office via our system OpenApply, as well as in many other departments such as transport, activities management, finance, and many more through our system SchoolsBuddy. We also work with schools in online learning via Pomoja, which offers online courses for IB students around the world, as well as Oxford Study Courses, which offers revision courses, as well as revision and study tools. Our latest system is MiniPD, which offers bite-sized personalized learning for international school educators around the world. Today, we serve over 4 million students in over 10,000 schools, including over 3,000 schools using ManageBack, over 700 using OpenApply, and over 400 using SchoolsBuddy in over 155 countries. As you can see, we have a long history of experience in a wide variety of functions across the school in thousands of schools around the world. We've seen a lot and we've learned a lot over the past 15 years, and we hope to pass some of that on to you today. Next, I want to provide a quick overview of the international schools landscape to set the scene for the trends we're going to discuss. First, I'd like to talk about how we define international schools, as this is something that's often debated. We'll go with Tristan Bunnell's definition, which is schools with a global outlook located mainly outside an English-speaking country, delivering a non-national curriculum, at least partly in English. We're starting here with pre-2007 because, as many of you know, there was a financial crisis in 2007 and 2008, and it had a very significant impact on the international school space. So we want to look at international schools pre-2007 and then also after the crisis. Prior to 2007, there were about 1,000 international schools in 1995. During that time, most of the schools were what we would call Type A schools. They're not-for-profit institutions serving globally mobile families working in business, diplomatic services, NGOs, etc. An example of this would be, say, the International School of Geneva. Type B schools are schools that were promoting a particular philosophy, such as the United World Colleges, who have the philosophy to unite people, nations, and cultures for peace and a sustainable future. Other early international schools were established by companies to educate the children of their employees. For example, oil companies would establish international schools close to where they were drilling so that families of the workers could go to school there. One of the good things about the definition that we're using is it's broad enough to hold true through the changes that we're going to talk about that happened in sort of the first 20 years of the 21st century. In 2007-2008, the global financial crisis hit international schools quite hard. Schools that typically served international families found themselves without students as international corporations cut funding, reduced their international workforces, and also reduced the compensation packages that they were offering to expats. To fill in the gap, these international schools started recruiting from the local population. Affluent families who might have aspirations for their children to learn in English and eventually study at universities abroad were interested in providing their children with an international education. This ended up leading to rapid growth of a new type of schools, which we'll call Type C. These are operated for profit and targeted the local populations. However, they did remain similar to Type A and Type B schools in some ways. For example, they were attending the same recruitment fairs, employing the same types of teachers, and delivering the same types of curriculum. So they were very similar, but there is a clear distinction to draw. Now, after 2008, the international school space grew very rapidly. By 2014, Type A and Type B schools were actually in the minority. Type C schools were dominating the market, and the epicenter of growth was China and the UAE. Some would call this the beginning of a new era in international schools. Between 2000 and 2018, there was over 300% growth in international schools, with over 11,000 schools in 2019, a long way from the 1,000 international schools just 25 years earlier. In 2019 and beyond, we've seen Type C actually split into different categories. We see the trend of school groups continuing to grow, particularly as during the pandemic, many individual schools struggled to survive with decreased enrollments, and sometimes they turned to school groups as a way to continue running. There are also what we'll call satellite schools. These are typically well-known brands, often from the UK, that are expanding to other countries, particularly in Asia. You might know them as Dulwich International, Harrow International, Wellington, etc. I'm sure you're familiar with some of them. We've also seen the rise of bilingual schools in recent years, which you might even want to term as a Type D school. These schools typically blend an international and local curriculum that is taught in the local language alongside usually another language, which is usually English. These schools are similar to other international schools in many ways, but they tend to have a bit more of a local culture to them. We're also seeing a growth in online and hybrid schools, which could perhaps even become a Type E school in the future. This is currently a very small segment. However, it's growing rapidly and expanding every year. Because Faria has traditionally served schools that run at least one IB program, I also wanted to touch on school growth in the IB space specifically. Over the years, the IB has seen similar growth to the international schools market overall, with the number of programs being offered worldwide growing over 33% over the past 6 years. So the IB has grown significantly alongside the international schools market, which one would expect. As you can see, the landscape of international schools has changed very significantly in the last 20 years. With 1,000 schools in 1995 to over 11,000 today, the rapid growth has been great for the space. However, it has also led to increased competition and increased pressure on a lot of international schools, which we'll start discussing once we look at some of the trends we've seen. The reason I wanted to set that landscape for you is because the context of the changes helps us to understand some of these trends we've been seeing at Faria over the past 15 years. When Faria's flagship product ManageBack was released in 2007, we initially found our niche helping schools move from paper to paperless to save time and money on postage. During that time, international schools were growing, but they still had slow paper-based processes, which were particularly ill-suited to organizations regularly dealing with people who are halfway across the world. For example, prior to moving processes online, IB schools had to physically mail all their documentation to the IB. This included EE, TOK, IAs, exam registrations, etc. The costs were significant, sometimes thousands of dollars, and the process was time-consuming. Schools really needed a better way to do things. Our founders wanted to make lives at IB schools easier, and a pivotal moment came when our co-founder, Theo King, was having lunch with the DP coordinator of a school in New York City. The coordinator invited Theo back to his office to see the mountains of paperwork that were stored there. This sparked an idea, and the rest is ManageBack history. Diving into the ManageBack blog vault, we can actually see what IB coordinators found important in 2010. You can see that some of the goals they had were reducing postage costs by submitting EEs, TOKs, etc. online versus having to mail them, submitting exam registrations to IBIS online instead of having to manually register and collect handwritten paper forms. Also, allowing online moderator access so IAs no longer had to be mailed as CDs and other physical media. As you can see, the goal was very clear. How did these coordinators get rid of all this paper? It didn't stop there, though. Things like submitting EEs, TOK, etc. online was really just the first step of many. Schools were rapidly growing after 2008. As I mentioned, over 300% growth among international schools between 2000 and 2018. As schools grew and the space became more competitive, they needed to be more efficient, and moving processes online was one way to do it. In the coming years, there was pressure to move more paper processes online, like unit planning, gradebooks, report cards, etc. The timeline on this slide shows what ManageBack was hearing from international schools around the world at the time. They needed these processes online. Now, they started with the basics, things like CAS, EE, TOK, etc. However, Soon, they were quickly moving beyond that to things like unit planning, whole school curriculum mapping, behavior and discipline, and more. In the past few years, schools have even been wanting to move the entire process virtual, which we'll talk about a little later in the presentation. While the academics department was focused on their paper to paperless transition in the early 2000s, we saw a similar cycle occur for admissions in the mid 2000s. In December 2011, we got a feature request from one of our schools asking us if we could help them move the admissions process online. As we started speaking with our schools about this, we found that many of them had similar problems to DP coordinators, with admissions offices full of wall-to-wall filing cabinets and a manual paper process that was cumbersome, both for the families overseas as well as those staff in the admissions offices. Off the back of the feature request, in early 2012, we reviewed over 500 international school websites and found that 87% did not have any way to submit an application online. A form had to be downloaded, filled out by hand, and submitted in the post. And that was really at the best of times. Some of them even required that you requested the form from the school first. With the help of several amazing international schools, we launched OpenApply with some of the most basic features needed to move the process online. Things like online forms, automated checklists, applicant profiles, tour bookings, and basic analytics. These schools continue to help us build out the system over the years, with more paperless features coming. They were always pushing for more, which we'll talk about a little later. In 2016, the Enrollment Management Association did a survey of international school admissions offices and found that by that time, 4 years after our original investigation, 51% of schools were using an online application form. They ran the survey again in 2019, and the number had jumped to 70%. So from 87% not using an online application form in 2012 to 70% using an online application in 2019, that's a really big change. And you can see how rapidly things were moving in the international school admission space. Now, when diving into the world of paperless admissions, we also found something that we hadn't seen on the academic side: a lack of community recognition and professional development opportunities for admissions staff. Teacher and coordinator professional development in international school communities had long been established. However, other parts of the school had been all but forgotten about over the years. There was a great desire amongst many in the international admissions profession to build a wider community, but finding the time and resources to do that was a real struggle. Now, OpenApply decided to help, starting with our conferences for admissions professionals in 2014, along with the launch of the International Admissions Bulletin in 2016. We've been really proud to support the admissions community in these endeavors and are delighted to see so many other organizations now supporting the admissions community with similar conferences. For example, COBIS has been running a conference for marketing development and admissions professionals since 2016. Now, I want to emphasize that all of these initiatives that we worked on in professional development were highly community driven. People like Catalina Gardescu from American International School Bucharest, Niven Elouar from Wellspring Learning Community, David Willows from International School of Brussels, just to name a very few. All of them were helping to push the boundaries of the space. We're really proud to have supported them, and it's been a great trend to see as the community has really grown over the past 8 years. And we really expect to see the international school admissions community continue to grow. We've also started to see other non-academic communities pop up in the international school space, such as tech director communities. It's so important that all staff, not just academic staff at international schools, have a space to grow and share ideas and learn from each other and build these communities. And we expect to see this trend continuing as the years go on. Now, considering academics are the heart of the school and core to its mission, it's no surprise that it was the first department we really saw moving online. While online admissions has become much more popular in the last few years, particularly during the pandemic, it's not the only department in the school that has followed academics' lead. Already in 2014, SchoolsBuddy found some international schools were looking for online solutions to manage after-school activities and trips, from the sign-up process to scheduling, paying related fees, managing communications with parents, and much more. Over the years, schools have continued to request to move other administrative aspects of the school online, including things like wraparound care, parent-teacher conferences, transport, and most recently, tuition fees billing. As you can see, there are a lot of different elements to allowing a school to function, and slowly but surely, they've all been moving online in search of greater efficiency. while moving all these functions online has helped schools enormously by streamlining tasks, saving time and money, there have also been some other benefits as well as some unexpected consequences. While the original goal behind going paperless across departments was often to save time and money, schools found an advantageous side effect was that they now had new data points to analyze. As online and paperless became the norm, schools started pushing the boundaries. They now are collecting thousands of data points and wanted to figure out how to use them. For example, shortly after introducing unit planners in ManageBack in 2010, coordinators were already pushing for curriculum analytics based on those unit plans in ManageBack. Next, schools asked for attendance analytics, portfolio analytics, and during the pandemic, when learning moved online, engagement analytics were the hot topic. We've seen similar trends across systems with a growing demand for more analytics. For example, ever since the launch of OpenApply in 2012, schools have been consistently pushing for more powerful analytics. I remember in 2017, when schools were practically beating down our doors for more powerful filtering. Considering the recent growth of school groups that we discussed earlier, it's also not surprising that we saw a similar increase in requests for a school group dashboard in the last few years to allow groups to analyze data across accounts. We've seen a similar push as well for activity analytics to review activity attendance, demand across age levels, etc. But all of this demand for data and analytics has also led to increasing challenges for schools. With so much data becoming available to schools, it's been harder and harder for them to process it all. In March 2018, at a tech director meetup that we hosted in Hong Kong, we discussed some of the challenges of data management with tech directors from international schools around the world. One of the things we highlighted was the growing number of schools we were seeing hiring data managers. An excerpt from a 2018 international school job posting for a data manager highlights that need. You'll see in the job posting things like increasingly complex school environment, relentless focus on attainment, and there's a hunger for data. The data manager is a pivotal figure. The good data is the foundation for target setting and an indicator for interventions to increase attainment. Obviously, this data management position was absolutely key already in 2018, and the need has continued to grow from there. Speaking of 2018, another significant concern we've seen for international school tech directors is data protection. While of course, data protection has always been a concern, the May 2018 enforcement date of GDPR put it front and center for international schools. It's made procuring and managing systems a much bigger challenge for tech directors. What could once be a simple email confirming that you'd like to receive an invoice and open your account has now turned into an ordeal of DPIAs and DPAs and other acronyms, which I'm sure are giving you all nightmares. While moving online has given schools access to all the data they could ever want, they may not have anticipated the complexity of managing that data, needing to integrate it across systems and keep it safe from unauthorized eyes. You can no longer just lock up a filing cabinet full of papers and consider all your data safe. While access to data is a great opportunity for schools, we also see data management as one of the biggest challenges, and we expect that that challenge will continue to grow as that opportunity evolves as well. Another trend we've seen growing in recent years is a need for customization and personalization. In the move from paper-based processes to online processes, a lot of school departments needed to go through a standardization process. One advantage of a paper-based process is that it's very easy to customize the process for individual students and families. However, it's extremely time-consuming and can cause confusion when later trying to review the records. When schools first moved their paper-based processes online, they often needed to compromise a bit in standardizing their processes. However, this was almost always worth it considering the potential time and money saving. Now that online processes are the norm, though, and both schools and vendors are much more experienced, there's a greater expectation to be able to customize online processes, both for the school and for the individual students and families. On the academic side, personalized learning has been a long-standing trend, and as schools have become more confident with online systems, they've been asking for more personalization options in their systems. This is where universal design for learning comes in. It's something that we really focus on with ManageBack. We want to ensure that students of all needs and abilities can be served by the learning system schools use. This includes things like enabling schools to offer online and blended learning options, something over a third of school leaders choose to do to differentiate and personalize course offerings. As you can see in the graphic here, the universal design for learning has three building blocks: accessibility, usability, and inclusion. Schools have for years looked for greater task differentiation functionality in their system. Teachers want to assign different tasks to specific students and groups of students, ensuring that all students, including those with exceptionalities, are catered for within their class. They want to progressively release content to students as relevant to them and their learning pace and needs. We've also seen a trend for teachers wanting to allow students to submit their work in different ways: videos, file uploads, audio recordings, images. This reduces learning barriers through providing students with choice. There has also been a push to increase access because schools want students and parents to be able to access resources and tasks and information from anywhere with a simple to use interface and multiple languages to meet their needs. And again, this goes back to the growth in local families attending international schools, which, as we mentioned at the beginning, has increased significantly over the past 10 years. Schools also look for systems that can provide consistency between teachers of the school. It helps the school set clear expectations of teachers and help students navigate their workload. In school admissions, one of the biggest fears of the admissions office has always been with going online has always been losing the personal touch with families. For many admissions officers, their favorite part of the job is interacting with the prospective families, learning about their needs and discussing how the school can benefit their child. They don't want to lose these aspects when going online, which is completely understandable. They also want the families to feel special and have a smooth experience. With much greater competition between international schools now than, say, 10 or 20 years ago, a personalized and professional experience for each family is more important than ever. Schools have been pushing for as much personalization as possible ever since we started building OpenApply. I remember when I first started working with OpenApply in 2016, and conditional fields was by far the biggest feature request that we got. Schools wanted to personalize the experience for parents so that they only saw exactly the fields that were relevant to them on the application form. Today, 98% of our schools are using the conditional fields functionality. So it's clearly a very important part of the personalization process. Schools really want to make sure that families feel special and have a personalized process when they're filling out the application form. A few years ago, schools were asking for similar functionality for the checklist in OpenApply. Again, they wanted to make sure that parents had a smooth experience and that it was fully personalized to exactly what their child needed. They didn't want parents seeing options that they didn't need to fill out or that maybe were optional or were something that other students might need. They really wanted the process to be personalized. Now, today, over 51% of our schools are personalizing their parent experience with the conditional checklists. So again, this was clearly very important to a lot of the international schools that we work with. More recently, we've heard from schools that they want to make use of automated email campaigns to help nurture prospective families through the application process by providing them relevant content about the school. They might personalize these automated emails based on interests, country location, children's age levels, or other details. In a survey we did about 2 years ago, 67% of our schools rated automated email campaigns as an important feature in an admissions system. So clearly, it's something a majority of international schools are looking to use to personalize their process. We even are seeing new products coming onto the market for a more personal connection with parents during the admissions process. For example, there are things like student and parent ambassadors online, personalized marketing videos, personalized sort of marketing landing pages, and much, much more. We see this as a trend that's only going to continue in international schools. As competition grows and more schools continue to pop up in a city, a school needs to differentiate itself and needs to provide that personalized process for the family. And again, as competition grows, and I mentioned before, over 300% increase since year 2000, schools are also focusing more and more on the parent experience for existing parents at the school. They really want to offer a seamless and personalized experience for each parent. They don't want a parent sort of looking across town and thinking, hey, maybe I'll have a better experience somewhere else, and maybe that'll be a better experience for my child too. A few of the things we've been seeing are, number one, a general sort of market focus on parent portals. And we see this across a lot of different types of systems. For example, MIS and SIS with systems like iSAMS, learning management systems like Firefly, content management systems like Finalsite, and even new products coming onto the market specifically as parent portals. Similarly, at Faria, we offer parent portals within our products. For example, existing parents can use the parent portal in Schools Buddy. For admissions parent portal, they can use Open Apply. And within ManageBack is the academic side of the parent portal. Recently, we rolled out a new home menu in ManageBack where parents can personalize the widgets and tiles that they want to see on their home screen. That's the graphic that you can see on the left side. This is a request we've often been hearing from schools so that parents can personalize what they see when they enter the system and what links they want to access quickly. We see that this is the kind of thing that's going to be expanding across systems because it's the kind of thing that the schools are asking for. They really want the parents to be able to personalize every aspect of their experience. We've also seen a growing desire from schools for multilingual access for parents. As mentioned before, many international schools are taking on more local families, and sometimes the parents do not speak the language at the school, which is typically English. So schools find it important that parents can access whatever systems they're using in their local language. We've also seen a push from schools for parent access to sports portals, where they can track their favorite teams at the school, most likely the ones that their child is on, and also seeing how they're doing in competitions with others. Again, this is just another way that the school can personalize the experience for parents and ensure that they have a good experience and don't start looking around at other schools. We definitely believe that this trend is going to continue into the future, with schools wanting to offer more and more customizations to parents to keep them happy and stay ahead of the curve and ahead of the local competition. The last trend I wanted to talk about is going virtual, something that, while present prior to the pandemic, was certainly kickstarted during COVID and has advanced rapidly since. Prior to the pandemic, online learning was typically reserved for special situations. Homeschooling of elite athletes, medical reasons, religious reasons, switching schools mid-program, etc. There were some exceptions, though. For example, in 2011, the US state of Florida passed a law requiring all high school students to take one online course before graduation. This was certainly a progressive move at the time, and I would say continues to be a progressive move. It definitely was not the norm. However, it does show that there were areas that were looking at online learning as the future already as early as 2011. However, I would say for most schools, that really didn't start until the COVID-19 pandemic in early 2020. Now, during the pandemic, many schools were forced to take up online learning. It certainly wasn't always easy, and many schools struggled. But upon reflection, international schools tended to agree that it actually led to good. In the ISC Research August 2020 Specialist Market Report on the impact of COVID-19 on EdTech in international schools, they asked schools if COVID had changed their future plans for use of technology in the classroom. Not only did 84% of schools say yes, but many respondents mentioned how the pandemic pushed their students and teachers to see how technology could benefit learning, and they plan to continue and expand its use inside and outside the classroom. You can see one such quote on the slide here. In 2021, Faria held its own survey of international schools, and 58% of them said online courses were part of their strategic planning, while 40% plan to offer a blend of online and in-person learning going forward. What's even better is that online, blended, and personalized learning is not just for students in the classroom. MiniPD is Faria's newest platform that supports online personalized professional development. Faria's own Hui Min saw how teachers were struggling with standard PD that was delivered in a one-size-fits-all lecture-style way. Teachers were moving towards a blended model in their classroom, but not getting the same benefits of relevant, ongoing, and reflective learning in their professional development. We see this blended professional development style, like online and blended learning for students, becoming a new trend in the future. Now, as many schools had to suddenly move online during the pandemic, they encountered a new challenge in online safety and safeguarding. Of course, all schools were already familiar with safeguarding, but I don't think many of them really anticipated the challenges that would come to moving learning online. For example, some of those challenges were the location of students. Many students would log online from their bedroom. However, that's really not ideal. The bedroom is a very personal place for a student. It'd be better if they had an open space within their house. But obviously, that was a challenge. Many families didn't have that, particularly when they had multiple children trying to learn online at once. There were also the behavioral expectations. Is it okay to take screenshots? Should you use chat? Does the camera need to be on or off? What do you wear? People were wearing pajamas sometimes, even the teachers. It definitely was something that wasn't really appropriate. The school-to-home relationship was also something that is affected with online safety and online safeguarding. It was very difficult to continue that relationship in the online environment, especially at the beginning. Sometimes parents and families were just overwhelmed and students wouldn't show up to school for weeks. However, there wasn't really anything that the school could do. They didn't necessarily have a way to reliably contact the parents, and it was a real challenge for many families and schools. Also, how do you monitor online lessons? Can you record them? Should you not record them? This was a big question that schools faced during online learning, initially during the beginning of the pandemic. Now, our recommendation is that the school really needs to set its own expectations, keeping in mind individuals' right to privacy and also local data protection laws. You really need to think about, is it necessary and is it proportionate? Safeguarding reporting lines are also something that we saw affected by online learning. How do you share with teachers, staff, parents, and students how to report concerns of student welfare and well-being? How do you cover multiple time zones if students and teachers were globally located? This was a real challenge for schools. Mental health and well-being was, of course, also a challenge. Many students were overwhelmed by the pandemic and the impact of isolation. We really found that teachers and students needed to focus on the things that they could affect and change, and not really dwell on the things that they couldn't change in order to keep a healthy mindset. Now, if you're struggling with how to do online safety and safeguarding at your school, check out how we've been handling the safeguarding for online learning at Faria. As I mentioned at the beginning, we do online courses via our Pomoja product, as well as online and face-to-face revision courses via Oxford Study Courses. We wrote a blog post, which you can click on the slide here, to find out more about how we're handling online safeguarding and the tips and tricks from our team. Now, in the admissions office, they were already used to working with families far away. However, during the pandemic, they still had some challenges and changes to go through. Number one, many schools previously still required the family to visit and do an in-person interview before enrolling a new student. Schools were forced to move the interviews online during the pandemic. And even after the pandemic, many schools have actually decided that they want to keep the online version. If a family is interested now, but maybe they're not able to visit because of travel restrictions or something else, there's no reason to actually make them wait and to connect with them. Allowing them to interview online speeds up the process, and it's easier for the family. Many schools that we've talked to around the world plan to keep online interviews, even though parents and families are now often able to come into the school again. We also saw another interesting change in how schools do tours and events. So prior to the pandemic, many of the schools we worked with actually wanted to limit the number of tours or events that a prospective family could attend. They simply didn't, they had many families that wanted to attend a lot of events or take multiple tours. However, when everything was in person, the schools simply didn't have the capacity to handle that. However, when things went online, they could offer as many seats to events as they wanted. And if a family came to every single online event, it really wasn't a problem for the school, and actually was a great sign that the family was engaged. So many schools are actually continuing to do online events and allowing parents now to attend multiple events, as many as they want, because it helps them improve the engagement of the family during the admissions process. We expect to see more and more interactions happening online going forward. We see schools looking into things like student and parent ambassador chat for prospective families, virtual tours that have sounds and games, not just a slideshow of pictures. Also, if classes are going online at some schools, maybe there could be things like virtual sit-ins for prospective students. They no longer actually need to be on campus to have the experience of what being a student at that school is like. Lastly, I want to talk about virtual parent engagement. After 2 years of the pandemic, schools have had to adapt to increase virtual communications with parents. However, even as many schools have gone back to being in-person teaching, virtual communications with parents continues to be preferred by both the school and the parents. In our first annual Faria Technology Conference in 2021, our keynote speaker, Adam Morris, identified that virtual parent-teacher conferences were one of the key things that went online during the pandemic that will be likely to stay online after the pandemic. In ISC's August 2020 EdTech report, they also featured quotes from many schools highlighting the advantages of virtual parent communication and how they plan to continue keeping a lot of communications virtual, even when things are back to in-person. The reason being that parents and teachers both really prefer the ease of joining meetings online rather than having to make time to attend in person, drive to the school, sit on tiny chairs, etc. Parents and teachers have also gotten used to video calls since they've been using them for work and other areas of their life. So it's not an unusual experience for them to have a meeting over, say, Zoom or Teams or another video conferencing tool. Systems have also caught up, giving schools significant flexibility to allow parents to schedule meetings with teachers online. They can book different slots and host the video call directly in the system. Now, what other parent interactions with the school might we see going virtual in the future? One thought is PTA meetings. Similar to the parent-teacher conference, why can't you also do PTA meetings online, allowing everyone to do it from the comfort of their homes, saving time and stress? There's also things like connections with parent ambassadors and new parent connections with newly enrolling families coming to the school. There's also things like web-based report cards. Many schools that we work with no longer do paper report cards at all. It's all online, all web-based. Also, the parent portals, again, we do expect these to become more in-depth and more customizable as we move forward, and schools want to cater to the parents' needs. Now that we've gone through some of the trends we've seen and have been seeing lately, we want to talk a little bit about where we see things going next. Now, what we did is we talked to some of our educators at Faria who are working in schools and with other educators on a daily basis to find out what trends they think we'll be seeing in the future. Now, feel free to pause the recording here and read these quotes a little bit more in depth. I won't read them to you. However, I'll pull out some of the highlights. Hui Min, for example, mentions the increase in student involvement and student voice that we're seeing in lessons these days. Mitch Campbell highlights students' superior ability to use technology and how that is affecting their expectations of how learning should work in the future and how that's changing. Layla Holmyard agrees with Hui about the increase in student-led learning that will allow learners to personalize their own learner experience. Adam Morris highlights the trend of leveraging data and analysis to achieve a deeper and broader understanding of happenings in the school and how that can help them meet their goals. Kathy Hitchin mentions the move to online and blended learning, while Fanny Passport believes a greater focus on equity and inclusion is something that we'll be seeing now and in the near future. Shauna Hobbs-Beckley is curious about how we'll see hybrid learning take off post-pandemic, while Kelby Zenor highlights student choice in their learning and educator choice in their professional development as being trends that will definitely continue going forward. Lastly, Amy Skidmore believes culturally responsive teaching is a trend we'll see picking up speed in international schools, particularly as schools start to move away from Western curriculum and traditions that have traditionally dominated. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you learned something about the insights we've seen from past developments and trends, as well as some things to look out for going forward. Please do feel free to contact us using any of the methods on the screen. We always love to hear from you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you again for joining me today.